Hey, what's up, Liron here. Today I'm going to show you basically why watercolor is my favorite medium, and we're going to focus a lot on flow. So I basically have a portrait here of a sculpture. I will link this reference photo in the description box, as well as a high quality scan so you can paint along with me. But I want to show you just why watercolor, in my opinion, still is my favorite medium for sure. And a lot of it has to do with the work process and the different effects that can be achieved. In this example, it's going to be the flow and connectedness. So I'm going to use a very simple color palette. It's going to be French Ultramarine, Quinacridone Rose, and Indian Yellow. These are the only three colors I use here for everything. Now I may add other colors, and I will let you know as soon as I do. Okay, there may be a bit of phthalo blue, a bit of different colors to just help us achieve different effects, but I want to show you how. So I'm going to start from the right side here. And basically I'm looking for a connection in the shapes. That's everything I'm looking for. So what I see here is all these shadows are connected. That's how I drew them, and that's how I intend to paint them. Okay, and it's quite cool here. And as it starts facing down, it gets a little warm, where I'm gonna add just a bit of quinacridone to the mix here to slightly warm it up. And as we reach the forehead, it goes a little cooler again. Now let's try, just for fun, to add a bit of phthalo blue right here. Just a bit of it, and see what kind of a mix we get here. And we're gonna make this a little cooler blue. All of this front of the face. Now something interesting happens here where the blue is kind of reflecting off of something, and it actually gets warmer, the light, the more we turn to the left. So I'm gonna mix a bit of a warmer mix here. But here's the thing, you wanna make sure that you don't go too overboard. With these mixes, we're talking about very gentle color and value changes. Okay, now let me zoom in, just because it's very fun to look at the process up close, and I want to really be able to show you that flow I'm talking about. And let's add a bit more quinacridone, a bit more yellow to our mix, and have this be a little bit more of an orange, right? Then there's a piece of shadow right here, and that's going to be connected here. Now one thing with watercolor is, again, thanks to the flow, you have a great variety in how your shapes are structured. So for example, it's very easy to blend edges compared to other mediums. Now what I'm going to do is use a very light warm mix here, and I'm going to connect it to this area as well. So I'm going to close in on this area that's a little lighter. And look at what I'm doing. I'm dipping basically my brush in the water bucket. I'm cleaning it up on the towel. I'm going to zoom out later and you will see more of the technique. Okay, I just really want you to see the paper right now. And look at what happens here. I'm sculpting the shape and the edges, right? And portraits and sculptures are among my favorite subjects to paint for, especially for this kind of a purpose. Now let us continue some of these. Some of these lines have dried, but I can actually connect to some of them that are still wet. Kind of get a nice little effect going here in the hair. Come back with a bit of a watery tea kind of mix that's barely has any strength to it. And then we can continue now off to this area here. Things are obviously going to be darker. These are the eye sockets, and I want to also pay attention to the nuance of values here. So we get a lot of warmth in this area, but then as we get to the eye itself, some more coolness. So I'm going to add a bit more of my blue here. And you can, by the way, use, a lot of people like to use burnt sienna and French ultramarine. That's another combination that makes it easier to travel between warm and cool and kind of can save time. So that's another color combination you may want to look into. So this here, this area is going to be blue. And then as it spreads out, we're going to revisit some of the warmth right around here. And I'm just following the shapes I drew, and I drew them just as I saw them. Drawing is a big part of painting, so that's something you may want to look into more. Of course, it's beyond the scope of this video. You know, drawing is an art form, of course, in and of itself. But let me just kind of pre-wet some areas here and let the paint flow. And it's going to help us later on. Now let's crank up the coolness, because what you'll notice is this area gets a little cooler actually here. And it all depends on, again, the context of light and shadow and what things reflect from where. And a lot of it is complex, and a lot of it you can edit. You can decide to change, of course. Now let's add a bit of warmth here in the middle. And look at what's going to happen here. Right next to this line, I'm going to add a small layer of warmth. So I'm mixing a bit more yellow and red in there. And I'm going to add a bit of that right around here. And that's going to create a beautiful effect of strong contrast between warm and cool. And then I'm going to blend it with some water on my brush, like that. And continue with my wash down here. Now look at what happens here. This edge is wet. So I'm going to get this flow. Again, this is what watercolor is all about. Can you get these things to flow nicely together and to make sense in that flow, right? It's not always easy. It's not always easy to both preserve that flow and get things to look realistic and maybe similar to the reference photo. A bit of a red down here to make this warmer. And I will have to clean that edge of the nostril. I'm just using a damp brush and just cleaning that line here, see? And continuing down here with that warmth, that's fine. The tip of the nose is actually a little darker, so let's do that. Darken it a bit, ever so slightly. Continue with that slightly warm-ish mix all the way down here. The one thing you want to pay attention to while you're doing this is the shape. There's a highlight here. Let's get that. Preserve it, right? There is, and let me zoom out a bit. So of course I managed to somehow not hit the record button, but that's fine. We missed some of the process, but not a lot actually. I was just doing some wet and wet here in the ear to darken it, and I was mentioning how I don't care as much if things spread out there, because that's really the edge of the painting. The focal point is going to be around the face, and as long as I have something clear here, I don't mind things kind of blending out a bit there. I'm going to use a bit of a sprayer to reawaken some sections, just deepen that shadow, okay? And I know the light may seem a little different just because I restarted the video, sorry about that. And let's create a warm neutral color, fairly light, because look at this, the way the hair is done. That area to the left is much warmer, and this is actually very apparent. So it's something I definitely want to emphasize here. Not too much, right? It's still the edge of the painting, but I do want to show that. And look at how nicely this part came together. It just looks good. It has that feeling of three-dimensionality, and that's solely by following the shapes I'm seeing. The color is important to some degree, but it's more about the values, believe it or not. As long as I get those to look good, the overall impression is going to look great, right? Now, I don't want a bunch of fragmented shapes, which is a very common mistake. So what I'm going to do, I'm coming back with a bit of a moist brush, and I'm just helping spread these out a bit and connect perhaps some parts of them. See? It doesn't even matter if the connection is there or not. I just don't want this section to be a bunch of separate shapes. You always want to think about what's the largest shape I can put here and make this look good. It's a very common mistake to have a bunch of fragmented shapes that mean nothing, really. You want to avoid that. Now a bit of coolness on the shoulder, right around here. I'm seeing a bit of that. And the real magic is going to come from the background, okay? Coming back with some water. I actually wanted to zoom out to show you more, and I ended up not hitting the record button, so my apologies about that. Now, here's what we're gonna do. Look at this area, by the way. How nice it's kept that beautiful blue feeling of it. Now, I'm gonna fill in the background, and I'm gonna switch to my large goat brush by Lebenzon brushes. Fantastic one for these kinds of uses. And I'm gonna mostly preserve my ultramarine Indian yellow combination. I find that it works well when you're able to stay unified with your color selections. Now here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna use these cleanly on paper. So a bit of blue. See, I'm dipping into the blue and I'm placing a bit of blue. And then I'm just gonna dip into the yellow and I'm gonna place a bit of yellow. Now of course they have mixed a bit on my palette, but I'm not putting too much of an emphasis on, let's say, how much they mix here. I'm gonna just place them in kind of cleanly and let the paper and gravity and water do its thing and mix them together, okay? And that's how you create a varied and interesting background. And I will give one more note about that. It does also mimic what the background actually looks like. It has quite a lot of shapes in it, quite a lot of highlights, a lot of different elements actually. Now I'm gonna lighten it up near the bottom where there are shadows. For maximum contrast, I'm gonna actually add a bit of red to that green to make it neutral. Because again, sides of the painting, you wanna sometimes avoid strong contrasts, strong shapes. You want to let it kind of move to the side, and that's going to be it. And as for the other side, I can really push some of the yellows and blues and everything here, because that's going to contrast with this well-lit area of her hair. So I'm going to let it kind of do its thing, mix wherever it wants. Sometimes you'll find that you have to rotate the paper to have an easier time working with it. Getting the right angle. Now let us put more emphasis on the contrast right around here. Just make this darker, right? And I'm going to use my finger sometimes for support. I put it like this on the paper so that I can have a little more accuracy without rotating the paper. I could rotate, honestly, I just don't want to disorient you at the moment. And you see how slowly the statue shape really comes to life as a three-dimensional object that's right in the center of our painting. Like so. And if you want to push the darks in some spots, you can do that while things are still wet. So let me mix quite a dark. And I'm going to add a bit of actually neutral tint to it. I find that neutral tint works really well with Indian yellow to mimic dark greens. And looks really good. Now you want to get the timing right while it's still wet, and I want to show you. See this? See the sheen? Still wet, still workable. The moment that sheen is gone, you're done, and you don't want to overdo it. Now I am going to put a few of these small shapes here down below, and I think it's going to be really more important in this area to have kind of these juicy dark shapes in. Just to kind of imitate the pattern of trees behind. Again, you gotta get these in while the paper is still wet. I'm not gonna touch this section because it's dry. Can you see it? No sheen. No significant sheen at least, so I'm not gonna do it there. And I think this stage is done. Let's let it dry and then we can revisit the face and bring out a few more smaller details. Now, while this is still drying, we can take a few moments and look at the edges we've created and see if anything stands out. So for example, these two edges are way too strong for my taste, and I forgot to add some color behind the ear. So let's just mix something that is kind of neutral, warm. And I'm gonna put some of it here. It is a little on the green side, so a little more red should be good. And kind of help that paint move around just a bit. And I want to loosen up some of these contrasts that are too strong. So for example, this edge here should be soft. So I'm using a Royal Langnickel brush, Zen series number 6, which I find is a great. There are brushes that are just made for that, for lifting and softening edges, and they have very short sables or hairs rather. So that's what I'm gonna do. See, and it just blends that edge right in. I don't need any of these strong edges so low down the painting, so far off from the focal point. And if you see any other edges you'd like to soften, do the same thing, like this. It's a very addictive process. You have to make sure you don't overdo it. Very easy to do too much of it, really. But I think that's good. I think that will put a better balance on the entire painting. See, you just soften some of these edges up and we're good to go. This, for example, would be a good candidate. This edge on the edge of the shape as well. But yeah, now we can give it again a few more moments to dry. Now things are fully dry, and I noticed one really big thing I forgot to tend to, which is this edge on the nose. So I'm gonna do the same and just soften that right up. because there is a gradual transition in direction there. Now I'm really close to messing it up by adding this paint that wasn't needed. So here we go, we lifted that and we preserved the shine. So a few things I want you to note as you look at this stage. First, notice just how much of a sense of realism is just created by abstract shapes, seemingly abstract. We didn't put any details here, and to make things worse, if you will, or better, depending on how you want to look at it, these shapes here, that's everything that really tells us the story of the face. But you know what a human face looks like, so it actually works. You know that the mouth bevels out a bit outside, so which is why we have this small triangular light. You don't know it on a conscious level, you know it on a subconscious level, and you know how to recognize it. So that's everything we needed. You know that the area around the eyelids is also beveled out, so it's more exposed to the light. You know all of these things. Now all that's left to do is to give it this final push that will bring out a few more of the smaller details within it. Really just a final push. So let me show you what I mean, right? This area, for example, right under the eyebrow is a little darker, so I'm using a fairly watery paint just to add a bit more darkness to it. Okay, and we're literally going to carve out something that may look a little more accurate and more realistic. Now, you could pre-wet, which is something I'll sometimes do, or you can use that same technique and soften the edges, right? Pre-wetting, they both have their advantages, but notice how this is pretty much all I need. I may do a bit of wet and wet while this tiny eyelid's still wet. And it's not eyelid, iris, and then eyelid. Now let's try the other approach and pre-wet, okay? So I'm gonna come back with some water on my brush. Not a lot, but some water. This entire area should be darker, so I'm just putting in some water there. Like so. And then I'm gonna come back with a neutral mix, maybe a bit on the cool side, but just a bit. And I'm just gonna pour that in. And I'm gonna get soft edges because I pre-wet this area, okay? That's what's important to understand. I'm gonna add a bit of darkness here, a bit of darkness within the eye, a bit of darkness here around the eyelid. And then I'm just gonna soften this out to the rest. I would argue that this section here is a little darker too, so let me go ahead and darken it a bit. And you see how I'm slowly kind of sculpting out, no pun intended, this shape of the eye socket here and just making it a little more visible, right? And you don't need much more than that to hint at it. In fact, I hope for it to dry a little lighter, and it probably will, so that it's less visible. Now let's tackle the, for example, the area under the nose, where we need a bit of a darker paint. So I'm adding these two together, French Ultramarine and the Quinacridone. And I'm just gonna use some very gentle transitions from that nostril onto slightly lighter paint into the front of the nose that should be a little darker. And then notice how this area here is a little darker too. And possibly the upper lip, but I'm not gonna put that much emphasis on it. I'm just gonna do the gap between the lips, maybe a bit of the upper lip too. Can't resist to try and carve out the shape of the face. And look at that nice subtle smile that we managed to create here. Just a bit. Shadow here, a bit of a shadow there. Kind of like that. Help the paint move. Still very gentle, we're not doing big changes here, but you see how it's enough to bring out a feeling of the face? Honestly, I think I would call this one done. Okay, it was way too fast to jump to conclusions. We need a little more details here actually, so let me show you. First, I'd like to slightly darken this area inside the eye. Should be more connected to this darker area, and it should be darker. Same goes for this area right above the eye. I'm gonna make it a little more visible. And then I'm gonna blend the top edge a little more here. A couple of other things, this looks much better. Let's darken very gently some areas of the hair up above. So that's gonna be mostly, I think, this group, right? It's not just a strand or one hair, it's a group of hairs, so we'll do that. I think that looks a little better and tells the story a little better. Blend some of this here. And move on to the next one, kind of the same way. Just a bit darker, you don't need much. I'm adding a bit of red to it as well to warm it up a bit. And I'm gonna do this, soften it up. Maybe there's a hint here of a few more groups, so let's put them in. And I think that puts this area at a bit of a better balance. And yeah, honestly, I really like that loose feeling the face has right now. So if I'm gonna add anything, it's gonna be still quite gentle. So let me think here for a second. Let's do this, a bit in the eye, very gently. Under the eyelid, just to indicate that shadow. Here as well. And perhaps here. And I would probably call it done. Let's let it dry, I'm gonna sign it. So final result, let's remove the tape and bask in the joy of that final result and the fun that is watercolor painting. And this is why I love the medium so much. Just look at all of these beautiful smooth transitions, plays of warm and cool, things that just cannot be achieved to this degree with probably any other medium, except digital, but you know, traditional videos. Look at that. That just looks so good in my opinion. All of the subtleties that you can convey with these smooth transitions, the fact that the process is quite fast for this kind of a result, you know, and the way you can dictate the focal point for the viewer by using contrast and temperature of colors like this really brings your attention here because of that strong blue, right? These contrasts here wrap around, the face looks really good. Some would like to blend these, to blend this line and kind of help them move together here to create an even looser impression there, but I like the way it looks right now. And yeah, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If you gained something out of it, please leave a like and let me know in a comment your thoughts, and also subscribe if you still aren't, and that's how you discover the channel. I'd be forever grateful. And don't forget to check out the courses in the links in the description box if you want to learn how to paint like me. Let go, enjoy the process, get the result you want. And I will talk to you again real soon.